Okay, looks like we should be live. And I'm just going to double check. Let me make sure that the sound is working, and let me know in the chat if there's any issues with the sound. Okay, there we go. Yeah, sorry about doing it later than usual and being late. Normally I try to do right at the same time, but this time was a little bit different. Trying to accommodate the other people that I live with. Okay. So, we are talking about narcissism and the narcissistic family dynamic. I'm not going to get through everything I wanted to talk about today, so we're going to do a part 2 next week. So I've had some videos that mention or discuss narcissism or effects of this kind of dynamic that you can have that has affected you in your life, that is a result of really how you grew up and can create quite a lot of childhood wounds and struggles with relationships. So this is why I thought it was relevant. It's something that a lot of people find a lot of connection to. Ultimately, these are themes that we are living through and engaging with and learning about in our lives, that we are also learning how to heal, work through, transmute, and transform. Our work here is transmuting and transforming these really dark, heavy energies and forces in our lives and healing them and creating something really beautiful out of them. We create wisdom and knowledge and really this depth of experience that is very valuable. Because, you know, in the realm of light and dark energy, we need to know, you know, what does this look like? What do consequences of choices and actions, what does that mean? And why do we want to make certain choices? So we really have to go through and learn these kind of things, and then we can decide, you know, I've had enough of this. I want to change what I'm experiencing and what I'm learning. I'm done with this. So we'll always have that choice where we can move through this and heal what's going on. So we'll start with narcissism, and this is a term that is widely used, which describes a certain theme that we're learning about in our lives individually and collectively. So some people experience pronounced cases, as in having a diagnosed personality disorder, but this exists in varying degrees with us personally and at all levels in society. So you could experience narcissistic traits within a company. You can see how there are these traits that start off at the leadership of the company and they filter their way down through the company. So what's tolerated at the top of the organization will be allowed to exist and almost rewarded at the lower levels of that organization. And I've seen that where this is really where I learned about narcissism. I learned about it through an organization where I experienced it directly. I experienced the word salad and the gaslighting and, you know, the really strong effect on my emotions and like having my nervous system being dysregulated in a way that didn't seem to match the situation. And a situation that would normally seem to be able to be resolved in a way, resolved quite easily, turned into this really big deal where you're dealing with, you know, people's egos and people trying to make themselves look better, not through a straightforward and honest way, trying to cover up their own faults, making other people look worse. And it's this technique of isolation and exclusion and pointing blame, and even to the extent of harming a person's reputation. So all these different mechanisms to elevate one person and put down other people. This shows up in politics. If you have a politics within a company, you have to play that social game. So you have these kind of dynamics where it's not just straightforward, and you know, people see at face value, you know, like, this person's full of shit, and you know, this person is telling the truth. There's these levels of lies and deception, and if you're stuck in that situation, it can be really like, what's going on here? So I had that experience. But it really led me to a deeper awareness of the dynamic of narcissism that happens within the family dynamic. So I'm going to talk more about that later. Okay, so we've got these different elements of narcissism. Descriptions: entitlement, very self-seeking behavior, manipulative, vampiric, masking inner insecurity. So there is that so-called God complex where you think you're so amazing, but really it's all about just quieting that inner voice that's like, I'm really not good enough, and I need to prove to the world where I am good enough. I've felt this. I've felt this just really strong desire to like be the best or be perfect in some way, and it was this desire to really mask that sense of inferiority, of feeling not good enough. It was a substitute for actually a strong sense of inner self-worth, and self-worth that isn't tied to like something outside of yourself. So, and at its core, at a spiritual level, narcissism is a condition where you're disconnected from your inner light. You're unable to self-sustain yourself on an energetic level, on a spiritual level, and there is this need to feed off others. So we're going to talk about this in just different aspects. So in a previous live stream, we're talking about waking up. We talked about Elohim, and this video on Elohim from the Fifth Kind channel. So we're talking about the description in the Old Testament of these advanced beings with seniority over humanity, which is also reflected in other myths within other traditions. And you've got Elion, which was the commander of the group of Elohim, divided the people and defined the boundaries of the nations. So you've got these different Elohim, which are basically commanding over the different people in different regions. And the one we hear about quite a bit is Yahweh, who's described as cruel, enforces absolute obedience. We can see how there's this God complex. And you know, it's in this case, it's like, well, yeah, it is justified because they are a being with a lot of power and a lot of capability, but we can see the strong difference here in this need to reinforce and validate themselves. Otherwise, when we talk about really true beings of the light, we know that they have a lot of humility. They are self-sustaining. They don't need validation. They're very supportive, encouraging. They don't need to take from anything or anyone else. Okay, and so there's this aspect which is reflecting this idea of narcissism. So I'm going through and discussing different aspects of it, you know, in different perspectives. So in this case, there's competition between the Elohims. Humans were sent out to war against each other on behalf of these powerful ones. Humans got brutally slaughtered to further the conflict between the individual Elohim. So very self-centered, not great. And we see this continued tradition among religious authorities throughout the history that we know to exert control and dominance over people. So you remember how I talked about in the earlier slides. We talked about how, you know, what's at the top is going to be reflected at the lower levels, right? So we have this authority that was established at the top here, and their attributes are going to be reflected within the lower levels. And so maybe this isn't the same time period that I'm talking about here. You know, this is shown throughout different time periods, but it's the same tradition, this same focus. And a lot of what Jesus talked about, Jesus was not okay with this. He was very, very against this kind of exerting control through the religious authority that was held through the priesthood. So I talk more about that in the live on Waking Up, but so here is an example. Okay, so this is a video that I haven't discussed yet. It is by the Cosmic Empress, and it's called How Negative Souls Affect Our Ascension Journey. And I thought this was really, really interesting. I referenced the video in a previous live, but never actually made any slides, just summarizing the points that it made. So I titled this slide Narcissism in the 4D. So hopefully it'll become clear why I called it that. So she talks about dark and light souls in different dimensions. So we've got the 3D, 4D, 5D, and she describes 4D as a transitional space between the 3D and 5D. So you have to pass through 4D to get to 5D. You've got the positive polarity and the negative polarity. So a soul living in positive polarity has a connection to the divine. The God spark remains intact when the soul enters the body. So through this connection, we receive life force energy from God, Creator, Source. However, a negative polarized soul is not connected to their divinity, not connected to higher realms. So they need to receive life force from other beings, other souls, other people. They have no resource to gain energy otherwise. And then we've got souls that are in between, right? So that is a lot of the people that we see. They have choices. We all have choices that we're making. So that bring us closer to that positive or negative polarity. So here's the theme of narcissism, relying on life source energy from others to survive. So, you know, we all know those people who are extremely draining to be around, right? They create chaos, to get energy from others. They don't have any internal supply. They can't feed themselves. And, you know, becoming really negatively polarized can be a result of continual negative choices. Although you have to make quite extreme choices over a long period of time, maybe lifetimes, but there's always the possibility for connecting to whatever soul spark you have and growing that. It's quite difficult. Like, the more negative polarized you get. But that's the power that we have. Okay, so you've got the situation where the soul ends up in the negative 4D realms. So she describes angels and guides being in 5D. So 5D can be what we imagine heaven to be like, and negative polarized souls go to the negative 5D. So negative 5D would be like hell. So we've got the 5D, 6D, 7D, and so these dimensions, they continue in both directions, positive and negative. So far we've only discussed 5D as the positive side, so this is just another perspective. So the higher the dimension is, the more purified the energy is, on the lighter side or on the denser side. So, I have a description of the negative side. This podcast was really interesting to listen to. Erika Elmuts did it on her Soul Speak, I believe that's the name of the podcast. It's on PodBeans. It's called Global Update, Lightworkers, Mission Shift, Free Will, Non-Human Creatures, and more. The link will be in this description for all the videos. So I'm talking about something she discussed, not the whole podcast, just something in particular that she discussed. She talked about dark or negative polarized beings sucking life force energy and using really grotesque methods as a way to hide what's happening. So it's so dark and so unpleasant, people just don't want to look at it. And that way it hides it. And sometimes it's difficult for people to even believe like that's possible or that even happens. They don't want to look at it. But do remember that there are different timelines. So this is happening on lower timelines. You know, on higher timelines, a lot of this can be cleaned up and dealt with. And we're in the intersect, so a lot of that is, we can see stuff showing up and evidence showing up of this kind of stuff happening, even though we might be on a higher timeline and not be dealing with that anymore. So if you want specifics about that, because I don't want to get into it, you think about the Sound of Freedom movie. There's this manga, When Jay-Z Whistles. So Jay-Z, J-A-S-Y, whistles. It doesn't describe exactly what happens, but it's really the energy of it. When I was reading it, it gave me this really, it just reminded me so much of this podcast and what's happening there. So I don't like to watch videos that really, they get you emotionally worked up and really tied into this negative energy. I prefer like discussions that are calm. So you know, there's lots of information about this. Some of it's not great to listen to because it's really done to like emphasize and play up the emotions in a negative way. I've also seen videos discussing the situation with Justin Bieber and Diddy, videos where Orlando Bloom is talking about those kind of situations. So this is what I would call another example. Whether it's true or not, it's an illustration of what is happening here. So we can see information about this coming to light. So we would call, you know, these kind of videos disclosure. And as disclosure increases, like something that can happen is that people can become so flooded with information about darkness that it creates a barrier to discovering the light. Like I said before, you know, there's many timelines, and awareness of this lower timeline and what's happening, or what has happened, doesn't stop us from elevating to higher timelines. Like, we can recognize, this has happened, but we're still moving and healing through this. And, if people are kept in the dark, they don't awaken to their gifts and to their light. So, these are things I mention, but I don't want to dwell on it. I want to move forward through it. Okay, so I'm going to refer to the video by Honey C. Golden. I referenced it in previous lives as well. And there's this specific aspect of it where she mentions, negative entities controlling humanity, where humanity is treated like livestock. She mentions Anunnaki genetically modifying people. So resulting in this fracturing of consciousness. And when I talked to my higher self about this, I had questions like, what does this mean? I got that a lot of this is resulting in personality disorders. It's not just the genetic modifying, but it's also exposing people to really deep levels of trauma. And so, there's this whole aspect of how we got to where we are, and a lot of the things that show up that are not pleasant. A lot of the things that we are healing and working through now. And the fact that we're able to heal through it and work through it, the consciousness is there to say that yes, you can heal through and work through it. And this is your extraordinary power to be able to do that. If you don't have access to that level of consciousness, you think, this is just the way it is. There's no way that we can fix this or heal this. So, if you want to maintain control over people, one way to do it is prevent them from accessing their gifts by enforcing this level of fracturing their soul, or fracturing or breaking their connection to God's source, breaking, their integrated mind, and creating all these issues. Okay, so that brings us to the narcissistic family. So we end up with this condition in society that was described in the book, The Narcissistic Family, by Stephanie Donaldson Pressman and Robert M. Pressman, where we have a result of a society where, the capabilities and beautiful mind and heart and connection to God's source has been fractured. And it's just a result of trauma and things being messed with that happens through lineages, through generations. So this is really strong within the family line. You cause a lot of trauma by causing trauma to the family line. And so we have this situation which is prevalent in a way that does it even make sense to have it so strongly showing up, and at so many levels. This is present in such a strong way in our society, and we're using this word narcissism to describe something that we can see very strongly present in so many ways. So I'm going to discuss a little bit here today about things that they talk about in the book, and I didn't get through all of them, so next week we'll have to go through the other important points that I want to mention about, because I didn't get to the things like the plastic wall, which I've mentioned in a previous video. So we'll discuss more on it next week. Okay, so within the narcissistic family, we have this parental structure, or where we've got parents or the caregivers who have an inability to see, hear, or react to the needs of another. And sometimes, they're just so stressed. They have so many other issues to deal with. So it's really quite difficult. It's not this kind of family dynamic where, there isn't this struggle to survive. So that amplifies any existing issues or problems. Children become a reactive reflection of their parents' needs, and they become not able to recognize their own needs and wants. So they're continually trying to gain attention and approval, but never succeeding. And it results in this default belief of unworthiness or lacking. So in this kind of family structure, the children meet the emotional needs of the parent or the parents. And it's a reversal of a healthy family system, where the children would learn how to meet their own needs independently, and in turn become parents who can model meeting their own needs. And so this is just a vicious cycle. And so I'll say, if you resonate with any of this and you've recognized, I need to heal through and work these kind of things out in your life, other people may be having relationships and having families of their own, and you've been taking your time. It's because, you're responsible and you refuse to inflict the same kind of harm that, was inflicted on you. So you're stopping and breaking the cycle. So that's whether you haven't had a family yet or you do have a family and you're starting the healing now. So in this situation, children are deprived of opportunities for necessary experimentation and growth. They don't trust their own feelings and judgments. So does that sound familiar for you? Not being able to trust your own feelings and judgments. That's a difficult thing to learn. There can be this emotional numbness. So this can grow out of your feelings being an inconvenience to the family structure. This is something that I experienced. I remember in my teen years just not feeling a lot of emotion. And especially not feeling emotion when I felt I was expected to feel emotion. I couldn't access emotion. And then, later on in my 20s, when I experienced depression, I didn't feel depressed. So I'm not sure if that's maybe I just didn't have access to emotions, or the depression just didn't show up and manifest in that way. It could be both. But of course, throughout the course of depression, I had to learn how to connect to my emotions and feel emotions, and that was not fun at all. I wasn't able to suppress or repress those emotions anymore. I had to learn how to do that. So that was the blessing in that, even though it wasn't very fun, it wasn't very it was quite painful. I was no longer able to, be this perfect child, this perfect daughter anymore. Because, it's a lot easier when you don't have to deal with emotions. Emotions make things quite challenging. Okay, so there's also this aspect of reacting to others' expectations. Where, instead of being internally guided, you are reactive. And I think a little bit of this shows up when, you have the story of someone going on a date, and like maybe you have a friend who goes on a date and they're kind of obsessed with what the other person thought of them, or what the other person wanted from them, and wondering whether they're good enough. So there's like a small example there. So here we have where the identity of the child reflects parental expectations. And any inability to reflect parental expectations is interpreted as the child being inadequate and a failure. So where there's this strong sense and anxiety about being a failure that arises from this family dynamic. So that's very, very difficult to deal with as well. There's this element of learning not to trust. So here's the crux of relationships as you grow up, when you come from this kind of family system. There's this desire to form close and loving relationships, but difficulty letting down barriers to trust. So that's the element of the plastic wall there. So as a child starts to differentiate from the parent, their needs become increasingly complex. And the parent may not be able to meet those needs. And you've got the issues where there's this perceived ownership over children, and this has been fairly prevalent, fairly recent in our history, where children were seen as objects and being basically owned by the parents. Similar for women as well. So the child is seen of an extension of the parent's self and can be unconsciously viewed as a tool that can be used for their benefit. This perception continues today, and we're continuing to work through this as it shows up in the unconscious attitudes and beliefs that we experience in our interactions with other people in society. So there's a difficulty for the children to say anything negative about the parents. The children's needs are sacrificed to serve other needs. For example, like putting on a good public appearance. Everything's fine, doesn't matter what goes on inside the home, as long as everyone else perceives, oh, it's a great family and they're doing great things. So, this kind of environment, if you're raised in this environment, it creates this inability to trust in the stability, safety, and equity of one's world, because your needs aren't important. So where's the sense of fairness there? And it results in distrusting your own perceptions, your own feelings, your own worth. Am I really valuable? Okay, so the book describes an overtly narcissistic family which can have drug problems, alcohol problems, addiction problems, very obvious problems. So there's a lot of tension in these environments. The children tend to try to appease the parent to gain some control over the situation and make things better. There's a strong fear of abandonment and extreme measures that they can take to deny the reality of the home situation. Now here's the issue. So the people who wrote the book recognized that, the same symptoms of people raised in environments where we look at it and say, yeah, that's abusive, it's easy to see. They exhibited the same symptoms of people who we look at the family, and even from the inside, it doesn't look abusive. But they're manifesting all the same symptoms. And there's this confusion and puzzlement. Why am I experiencing this as an adult? Why am I struggling with this? And so it's the same dynamic, but it's showing up in a very subtle way, or very subtle ways. And we're starting to recognize and realize, that's still not okay. Even if you're not outright beating your kids, we're bringing awareness. This is not the behavior or dynamic of an environment where the people are cohesive in their being. Like they're full and they're whole in themselves. Okay, so you've got, these symptoms of masking your feelings, pretending to feel things you don't feel, and hiding feelings. Okay, so some common characteristics of this family structure include indirect communication. So an inability to express feelings in a timely or appropriate manner. It's a lot of indirect communication. Triangularization. So this can happen when there's this instead of talking to the person directly, sending messages through other people, confiding in children. So this happened in my family quite a bit. And it is very difficult because like you're kind of taking the kids and pitting them against either parent. Another aspect of this is that this reminds me of is, for example, my dad pressuring me to like make a budget for the family's finances. And it took several years for me to realize it doesn't matter what I did. Like my parent, like he would never manage his finances well. It didn't matter what I did, right? Like if your name isn't on the bank account and you can't restrict their access to the money, they're still going to spend it. But there is this illusion of control, even though it makes absolutely no sense. Hi, Paul. Oh, you didn't miss it. That's fine. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Paul just said he's just getting home now and he's got another live for his meditation. But meditating is awesome. So you go and enjoy that. This live will still be here when you're done. So, and you'll still be able to share in the comments. And Paul has shared before in videos, his understanding of this subject as well. So he's knows about it at quite a deep level too. But yeah, thank you so much for joining and popping in and sharing a message. And, it's so great to grow up, recognize that, that we experience this, but then we are healing and we are creating these beautiful lives of our own. And that's just the most beautiful and perfect thing that we can do. So, being busy, that's great. You've got good things going on for you in your life. So the next thing about the common characteristics of the narcissistic family is lack of parental accessibility. So, sometimes they can be accessible, sometimes not. So it can be variable. But one thing that is common is there's no conversation about feelings. I would say that's just doesn't happen. So they might have accessibility in terms of like you can do things together. Sometimes they will accept to do things that you enjoy, but you might only be able to do things together that align with their own interests. So, this is a huge issue with the narcissistic family, or narcissistic family structure, is unclear boundaries and lack of privacy. And so I've seen another video about this lady. She was talking about her father and how he just violated what should be, boundaries for your children and for your daughter. So it was just, jokes and innuendos that were just really inappropriate, not respecting the privacy and boundary of one's own personal space. Even getting close to adulthood. So in those teen years, like that privacy is really important. and that respect, like there's no respect there. You'll watch the recording afterwards and put your comments in. Awesome. This subject resonates with me, being that my mother was so tough. Yeah. So this is Paul that I'm reading the comment from. Yeah, thank you so much. I just heard you and we'll see you soon. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, no, I know this resonates with a lot of people, so which is why I'm discussing it. So there's these moving targets. So what they really mean by moving targets is that there's no, consequence for actions. It's just changing. There's nothing that's like, okay, this is what's gonna happen if this happens. So like, sometimes you can get away with stuff, sometimes there's just this outburst, and sometimes like there's no follow through. The kids are exploring boundaries, right? And what's okay and what's not okay, and so then it's like, it just becomes like nothing is okay. Or maybe, for some kids in the same family structure, some kids can experience like they can get away with anything, and the black sheep gets blamed for everything, and so can be this very like walking on eggshells kind of situation that's really, really difficult. Children's needs are only met when it coincides with the caregiver's interests. So there's this, the moving targets can happen in a way where discipline needs to be enforced and it's done really badly, and also where it comes to getting needs met. So it can be very unpredictable. Or it can be predictable, and are able to predict like this is going to unfold in a really unpleasant, destructive way. And it's like you can see it coming, you're trying to mitigate it, but it happens. Okay, so you get with the kids, there's this lack of entitlement. You feel like not entitled to have, express, or experience feelings that are unacceptable to the parents, and if you express those feelings, like the reaction you can get from them can be really strong. Be like, okay, like wow, you're a bad person for feeling that, and it can be a personal attack for them. And then you get the reaction, which is to stuff, sublimate, deny, lie about, this is like, but that's a typo, lie about, fake feelings, and even forget how to experience feelings. So it's, if you can live like a machine and not experience feelings, it works great for a little while. But feelings give us a lot of depth. And if you're a machine, if you live like a machine, what are you living for? Who are you living for? You're not living as an autonomous being, as your own, I forget the word, but your own sovereign being, right? You're kind of living as a tool for someone else to use. And that's the really sad part of it. And this is really, really important. We're learning how to be autonomous, sovereign beings, and it's hard. We got to get through all these layers of trauma and wounds. Yeah. I did a short video about, relationships. They help us to heal and learn how to trust and know when it's safe to trust and when it's not safe to trust. And so, these kind of relationships, there's relationships with certain people which can really push us in a positive way what is painful initially. So it's like, that those kind of relationships that we want to have in adulthood, where we're craving that closeness, we're craving that intimacy, but then it's scary to trust. It's scary that you could get hurt. It's scary to learn how to express your feelings, and it's not gonna be a dangerous situation for you if you do express those feelings. And we can see, like what we've discussed already, how yes, maybe as a child it was very dangerous to express your feelings, and maybe you grew up just not doing it. So, and now maybe you want to, but it's hard, and we can have compassion for people who experience this, that we interact with, and release the expectation of them to be able to interact with us in a healthy manner, and let them recognize and learn themselves how they can heal, so they can come to us and engage with us in a more positive, healthy way. So that, like, there's the aspect of us with others too, where we can set that boundary. And let's say you have an interaction with someone else, and the initial interaction you have, it's not great. You're like, this person's got some issues they have to work on, and I feel hurt by what they said or they did. And that results in you not having a relationship with them. Okay, well, what if they come back and they're like, I do want a relationship with you, and either they haven't changed or healed or grown, or they have. And you can see that through the indicators of what they do, right? So you have a choice. You can hold on to past pain about what happened with that person, or you can interact with the person they are in the now. And I might do some more videos, like, kind of thinking about this subject. And of course it also depends on, your memory of that person. So when you see them, you remember, like, what's happened in the past. So that depends on, their ability and their degree to be able to, like, maybe they've really changed, and maybe they're really actually acting in a completely different way. So it's not even an issue, right? So that's the ideal case. But, holding on to resentment for people for acting the way they do, it doesn't make sense. Because, if they're not in your life, and technically you're safe from them, but then, there's that craving, that idealization, just some kind of fantasy where you're like, if I just did this, like, maybe they could change, and maybe they could be better, and maybe they could be the way I want them to be. The truth is that, if they're not in your life and you've set that boundary, you're in the best possible situation there is right now. You are free from an entanglement with someone who isn't in a healthy place. And there's a possibility for you to be in a relationship with someone who is in a healthy place in the future. So this is much better than being in the only other alternative that exists at that moment, which would be in a relationship with someone who isn't in a healthy place. So you have the best option. You chose, and you are living the best option. And we have this kind of fantasy about what things could have been. Well, they can be. But where you are now, give yourself credit. And that's the thing, is like, getting out of enmeshed situations, there can be like that sense of loneliness, but that's part of the process, right? Part of the process of growth and healing, and creating space for new beautiful things. Okay, so back to the common characteristics. We've got the mind reading. So expectation to meet unspoken needs, and it's like, typically in relationship, there can be needs that you don't have to explain everything, and hopefully there's this common understanding, but it's not to the point where it's like you're expecting them to know something that it's not reasonable for them to know. maybe we will get telepathic and mind reading skills in the future, but I think what might happen with this, you might be testing it out with someone where you have a good relationship with, and you're like, you attempt it, and you're like, okay, like, I tried it, and like, what did you get? And so, like, I think this could just happen in a positive like, dynamic, right? Like, not in this kind of toxic dynamic. We've got ineffective communication and like emotional blackmail. So it's like, yeah, kind of like you create this emotional tone in the environment where it's like you're mad at someone because they didn't do something. And I find myself coming up with these like patterns of emotion that show up in response to certain situations, and then I often don't act on it because I have awareness about it. But I recognize that within myself, where it's like, oh, I'm upset that they didn't do this. It's like, I'd like if they did that. But, you know, it would be nice if that person did that. You're not always in a position even to ask someone for something. Like, it's not reasonable for you to ask because of the dynamic. So that's where it changes. The entitlement changes. So it's like, it'd be nice if this person does this versus I expect them to do it, and I'm upset that they didn't. So, you know, if we grow up in this kind of environment, you know, this can become our normal, and then we can exhibit these kind of traits with others in our lives, which isn't healthy. And that's why we're developing awareness around this and healing from it. Oh, I mean, the first time I read this book, I didn't connect with it because I was like, that's upsetting and that's sad. The second time I read it, I started connecting, and I felt a lot of pain in my heart. And I think it's very healing to, you know, to read something like that and feel that level of validation where, you know, they're speaking, the authors are really speaking to you. They've got lots of examples in the book. I definitely recommend it. Okay, so they talk about the narcissistic model, the narcissist myth. So, you know, narcissism, we clearly see the connection in the word between narcissists, just becoming so enamored with himself that he fell in love with his own reflection. So that's kind of an interesting myth. There's a lot of more layers to our understanding of it now, but we have these themes of self-absorption, lack of genuine caring, superficiality, concern with external appearances, shallowness, distancing, because there was someone, I think Echo, in the story who fell in love with Narcissus, but Narcissus was not interested in this person at all. They were not interested in an actual connection. There's an unwillingness to get too close or give too much. We see this in dating a lot of the time. Like, you know, a lot of people get a bad rep, you know, like in society in general, for being narcissistic, because there's this like, fear of getting too close, or like showing that you care too much, or just like being authentic and vulnerable at all. And you like, yeah, I get flack for it from people. There's this exaggerated need for reassurance, concern with external appearances over internal substance. So, you know, do you recognize in yourself taking responsibility for things over which you have no control? I remember this a lot. Like, I had so much anxiety when I used to ski race, where there was this almost this perception of control over things that I had no control over. Like all these different variables around the race, right? Like the weather, like I felt this pressure to be able to like adapt my ability to ski based on like the weather and the wax and all these different things. And I felt so much pressure. And it was so stressful. Like, you know, taking responsibility over all these things in all these subtle ways makes your life incredibly stressful. So there's this disconnection from emotions where you really need to develop emotional awareness. And And part of the healing process involves stop wasting your emotional energy trying to recreate situations that never existed, like the happy family. Or, you know, even with people who've dated someone quite narcissistic, like trying to recreate that situation with someone else, even of the same situation where the person has the same like kind of nasty characteristics, but you're trying to make it better. Like you're trying to do enough to like make it all better, and you can't. It's not gonna happen. Where you're trying to win approval that you will never get. So you recognize within yourself you trying to get that. Like so much of what we've talked about today show up as emotional patterns that I've seen within myself. That I see and I recognize and I'm like, right? And you see it and you recognize it and you just let it be there, right? You still live your life and do what you need to do and recognize that, you know, those themes are coming up for you. You can feel it, but not necessarily like act on it and continue to create a chaotic situation in your life. Like, it's really nice to be able to reduce the chaos in your life. You want to create a fulfilling life for yourself where, you know, financial independence helps a lot with this. But whatever kind of independence you can gain, you know, you can be around someone and still kind of cut them off from your energy. Stop giving them energy. I'm going to give some examples of this, which I find in my life. There's this expectation you're walking down the street to say hello to people. Now, I do not like this sometimes. There's certain people, like I was walking a couple weeks ago, and there are these two guys that were walking down the street, and they were swearing and, like, you know, jovial and laughing, and I did not like the energy. I did not like the vibe. I feel this energy of trying to get my attention. And I feel pressure to say hello and be pleasant because there's this fear if I don't, they'll kind of be like that bitch, and, you know, young women are so entitled and blah, 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 right? But I don't like the situation, and what I could do is I could just ignore them. Right? And they might insult me and whatever. But, you know, there's that pressure to engage. And if you don't engage in the way they want you to, you're kind of like a bad person, right? That's just a small example, but there are ways that you can disengage and that you will likely be shamed for. And it, you know, it is definitely your decision to how much you want to play into these kind of games, but, like, you know, people who have this aspect or element within them, they will try to shame you for having boundaries, for having self-respect, for exerting, like, your own decisions and your own feelings. Like, I don't feel good about this, right? But you can create power in your life. So that's where, you know, that feeling of feeling powerless can come in, right? So, and this is scary, but this is something you can work through and learn within your own life and within yourself. Small ways in where you can enforce boundaries and validate and acknowledge your own feelings. Because people who validate and acknowledge your feelings, they will respect when you set boundaries. That's the amazing part of it, right? And it's so cool when you actually meet these people and let these people into your life. Like, I had this persistent anxiety about, you know, getting married, and then, you know, the person I'm marrying, like, kissing my father's ass and then expecting me to do the same. and not validating my own feelings. Not respecting my need for distance, for that boundary. I had this fear, and what that was is not realizing, like, no, I actually deserve someone who validates and respects my own feelings. Like, I didn't even realize, like, I could actually marry someone who, yeah, validates and respects my own feelings, and, like, I didn't even realize that. So, like, this can be so unconscious. How many people get married to people who don't really respect or value them? Like, we've seen this happen over and over again. Like, I read or I watch videos that talk about this. There's lots of videos that are talking about this now, where people who married a partner who didn't value them, who didn't acknowledge and validate them, who were only in it for themselves. So it's just this complete dynamic. That's the beauty of awareness. We can see it, and we have the choice and decision about what we want to do with it. Okay. So this is the last slide that I've prepared, so we're going to continue with this next week. So, that's another thing that I've struggled with, is this difficulty dealing with criticism. It was so scary, any kind of criticism. I didn't do my homework once in 5th grade, and I got detention for it, and I was mortified. Like, I got out of it because I was in running club. So I didn't actually do detention, but, like, it was, and it just continued, as I grew. It was such a struggle to deal with criticism. It's natural to make mistakes, right? There's another aspect that's challenging, is taking rejection as personal. And it's like, oh, you're not supposed to take rejection personal. But, like, when it's wired into you, because, any kind of rejection, when you grew up, it's a subtle clue. Chaos is about to happen. Shit's about to hit the fan. You better start to manage it. Right? Okay, so there is this aspect of going back into dysfunctional or harmful situations, expecting you can make it better. So I don't actually do this in my life. I do it in my mind, though. I, like, create situations in my mind, like, of engaging in, like, dysfunctional situations. Like, that's been coming up recently, actually. Until I'm like, wait, no, I don't have to have this or deal with this, like, and coming up with ways, like, oh, I could do this to deal with this situation. Like, why would you need to deal with this situation to begin with? You could just say no to it. It's like, oh, that's right, I could. Yeah. Okay. So, and then the other part of healing is learning to evaluate other people's requests on the basis of your own available time, energy, and interest. And this is hard, like, saying no and being selfish. Like, oh, imagine, your family is, like, wants you to do this and this and this, and you can't. Like, you don't have the energy for it, it's draining for you, and you say no, and they freak out and call you selfish and names and shame you, and it's not pleasant, right? And there's this part of your dark energy that you learn to harness, and, like, okay, yeah, no, I'll be selfish. Because it's healthy for me to be selfish. Where we reclaim the word selfish, where maybe it was used against you to shame you. And you're like, okay, no, that's actually a good word now. This is what I want to be. Because a healthy me and a healthy life for myself creates much more than a dynamic where I'm constantly having my energy drained from me and I can't create anything in my life. Yeah. Okay. So for the live last week, I said I was going to do a Rumble video. I haven't done it yet. So this video would be more on the stuff that I've like mentioned today and last week, but it's more kind of like that dark stuff. So I've been putting it off because I'm kind of like, I don't really want to talk about it. And I have quite a few pages of notes of content. So like I have the content, I haven't really wanted to talk about it. So we'll see. I might still do like the Rumble video on that if I feel like it. I don't think it's necessarily like necessary. And I do think, you know, a lot of these negative things, we're recognizing that they happened. We're learning, I think we're going to be learning about the things that impact us. And because, you know, like things can come on the news and if it doesn't impact you, you're like, well, I don't need to pay attention to that. I don't need to get drawn into every negative thing. But if it impacts you directly, like, yes, you can have some interest. I mean, you might take some more interest in learning about it. And it can kind of like integrate into your worldview and give you a more holistic understanding and perspective. So, you know, those kind of things are helpful in that aspect, you know, for that understanding and integration of like who we are and what's happened and how did we get to this point. But what's really interesting and exciting is growing at this point. So to recap, you know, we've been going through a period of really collective growth, through a period of ascension and awakening. You know, there's the different versions and meanings of like what that means, but we've talked about, you know, developing, raising the frequency of our light bodies and moving from 3D through 4D up to 5D and growing in our consciousness, like becoming like higher consciousness, integrating with our higher selves to a greater level, discovering our gifts and abilities. I talked about, you know, ascension symptoms, and that was really showing up in last December a lot, where we had, you know, these like cold-like symptoms or like fatigue that was showing up. And this week, the beginning of the week, I felt great. I think I had great energy. And then last night, I was almost like I had the flu. But it's weird because it's like sick, but not in the way that's familiar. So I was like super achy all over and tired and nauseous, and I was like, like I feel sick, but normally I'd have more symptoms if I was actually sick. And then I woke up this morning and the achiness was gone. I was like, you know what? It's going to be gone soon. I'm not going to worry about it. It's going to be fine. And most of it disappeared the next day. So today I felt pretty good. And I was like, oh, that was weird. And, you know, the body is adjusting. And it can be purging this kind of stuff. So it can look like a cold, look like different kind of illness, but maybe behave slightly differently. So we're going to continue to have those kind of experiences. Through February, March, we don't really know what that's going to look like, but I'm still tired. But trust in your body's ability to heal through it, and trust that, you know what, this doesn't have to take a long time. This doesn't have to look like what I know sickness to look like. I can give myself like extra understanding and compassion, but I trust my ability to heal, and have that faith in yourself. yeah, so we've got next week the part 2 of the narcissistic family dynamic. So I'm going to talk a bit more about, I'm just basically going through the parts of the book that I highlighted and that I found interesting. So like maybe some of the notes seemed jumbled a little bit, but it's kind of the progression of the book as they talk about different aspects of it. And then the other thing I was thinking about doing a live stream on was, so we can create new reality, right? So like, but how do we do that? You know, we can do like the high level and then really looking into the details. And how do we create? Like we create from paradigms, ideas that we're familiar with. How do you create new paradigms, or how do you shift like kind of these patterns of thinking? So I started to think about it, like we've heard people talk about it, we've talked about it, but you know, there can be this whole level of detail and depth and discussion to our ability to create, to imagine new things. Like, and I was just thinking, you know, you could go into a lot of detail and create a lot of structure into that process. So I was thinking about, you know, talking more about that in the following live stream. Yeah, so it should be fun, should be interesting. I'm expecting like having more fatigue, you know, in the coming months, but beautiful things are coming, beautiful things are happening. You know, however soon or however long it takes. I know that, you know, I've been struggling with a lot of fatigue and for several years, like dealing and processing a lot of underlying stuff. But eventually, like I trust that I'm going to get a lot more energy to be able to, you know, create more videos and create more of this kind of content and, you know, enjoy this process. For this to become something that is really enlivening and really helpful, both to myself, you know, and everyone here who's joining me on this channel, who is contributing and just engaging, you know, with what we're talking about here, and like adding their essence to it. You like, as you're thinking about it, what we're talking about, and you're adding your own ideas to it, right? You're adding to the collective space and collective consciousness of what's going on. So yeah, thank you for being here, and thank you for joining us here. And we will see you next time. Bye.